This very special episode of Bonfireside Chat is brought to you by our very special patrons from Patreon.com. If you go to Patreon.com/Duckfeed.tv, you can see a veritable who's who of awesome people who have decided to kick us a few bucks a month in order to keep the lights on and show their appreciation. If you are one of those people, thank you very much. If you'd like to become one of those people, head on over. It's an easy process, and as little as $1 a month makes a big difference. And thank you very much, and on with the show.
Some of our landings were desperate adventures. We are now prepared to meet the inevitable counterattacks with power and with confidence.
My name is Gary Butterfield.
My name is Kole Ross.
And I'm Illusorywall.
And you're listening to Bonfireside Chat. It is a cursed favorite.
Yes, and this week we are doing a very special episode about data mining, and it's very good that we have Illusorywall here. Thank you for joining us.
Cool, yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so you can check out his work at illusorywall.tumblr.com. We've referenced it a lot over the course of the series. I think since the Demon's Souls episodes, when you started sending in notes, and I think that's around the time that the blog started up in earnest as well. So we're very happy to have you.
Cool. Yeah. No, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. For people who are unfamiliar, who have ignored our notes, every time, how dare you? And then also, so if you go to that website, which we heartily recommend, or actually I'll let you explain it. Illusory, can you just kind of in a nutshell say what you do on the Tumblr?
Sure. There's a little header on the Tumblr. I forgot what I wrote exactly, but it's something along the lines of, I test debated mechanics in the Souls games, and I also try to poke around for unused content. Or if there's just anything weird in general, any oddities, I guess I'd call them, I try to share what I find.
Yeah. And if you've probably, if you watch Souls videos on YouTube and stuff, you've probably seen hit Illusory's work. So things like you really crack the case wide open with vagrants.
Yep.
Oh yeah. That was a big testing project. And I don't make any videos myself because I don't have anything to capture with. But usually some of the other people who make videos, sometimes I work with them, or sometimes they might reference some of the testing I do. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think what you do is so great because the Soul series has a lot of, for lack of a better word, like hoodoo around it. There's a lot of like urban legends and superstition and things, and there are numbers backing this up. We just need somebody who has the patience to go in and find it, and I think that is the role that you've served very well.
Yeah, and that's really why I got sucked in the first place, because before the Souls games, I never really contributed to a game's wiki or anything like that before. And but I was a really big fan of Demon's Souls, and then didn't really think to poke around that game too much. There was already a wiki established by the time I got into the game, and then I was right on board for Dark Souls right when that came out. And then once I was actually active in that game from the launch and seeing all the speculation about different mechanics and all the guesswork involved, it sort of light bulb went off. I was like, hey, someone should try to actually figure out what's going on with these games.
So what you're saying is. Your blog is the one good thing that came out of the pendant. They introduced the pendant.
I think that's actually a pretty fair thing to say. Yeah, all the speculation really, especially with the pendant too, there was a lot of wild speculation, and I was just sort of looking at that, with a bit of skepticism, but also an awareness that there are a lot of, poorly understood or not yet figured out mechanics. So that's what sucked me in.
The way that I like to use the blog and the way I like to experience Soul games, like the stuff that you've done both through working with YouTube people and then also on the blog, that's helped me a lot. Is I like to go into a Dark Souls experience as fresh as possible, and then as soon as I beat that last boss, I'm like, okay, what is everything I missed? Now I just want all of the information in the world, about it, and it's been really great. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of contribute to that angle.
Oh. Can you talk a little bit about the actual process of finding what you find, and then kind of maybe chronologically? So how you first started poking around, and then what you and how that maybe changes now or changed now.
Sure. There's sort of two main things I do for poking around, but the first thing I did was first sort of project I took on was for Dark Souls 1, where I was just interested in all the places you can invade from. And at the time, there was no sort of list. If you do a search now for just like Dark Souls 1 invasion spawn locations, you'll find the page I wrote on the wiki dot. That was something I thought was really interesting because there was a lot of guessing. People were sort of asking like, hey, how many places can you invade in a level? How many places can you be invaded from in Sen's Fortress? And I'd see answers like, oh, there's 2 or 3 places you can invade. And then after I actually sort of tested the whole level, I found there were like 7 different places you can invade in Sen's Fortress. So that right there sort of kickstarted things. I was kind of like, wow, there's a lot of stuff people don't know about how this works yet.
So kind of analog testing, initially,
yes.
Where you just kind of literally just go in and just kind of experiment.
Oh, yeah. And that's like the sort of the bulk of what I do. I mean, I definitely do some poking around the files, but a lot of it's just sort of good old-fashioned testing that I do. I only have the game's on PS3, so before the Mega Mule came out, I was doing everything legit. I'd have any tools to assist me. I would sort of base playthroughs around trying to figure out how something worked.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about Mega Mule because it sounds like a real nightmare of patience, where you have to just invade for, especially just invade for like a day and just kind of jot down locations.
Yeah, because that would sort of, to find out every place you could invade from, you'd have to sort of test the boundaries. Like you'd invade from the very beginning of the level, then sort of go just further into it and see if you pop out in the same place or not, and then just sort of tediously do that like throughout like every level. So yeah, that was like that I think that might have taken a couple weeks. I don't really remember, but
I mean, is that something that gets easier as you go along, or do you kind of have to have this enforced mandatory thoroughness to it? Like, do you get a sense for, okay, like it's divided into rooms or it's divided into these regions of a map?
You get a bit of a sense for it, but you still have to be thorough just to make sure your information is correct. So that's something I sort of try to do. I try to be as thorough as I can. Just definitely time consuming, but I don't know. It's sort of, I have a lot of fun doing that though. Sometimes I'll have just a normal playthrough of the game, and then I sort of derive some odd pleasure out of having a weird playthrough where it's just sort of focused around learning something about the game.
For some of our listeners who might be a little bit more casual, can you describe what Mega Mule is? Yeah, step off, totally casual.
Yeah, stop listening.
Can you describe what Mega Mule is and like how that has made your job easier?
Oh God, yeah. Mega Mule is a somewhat controversial tool that someone made. I think his name was like Duckfeed or something like that. He's like a streamer and does some other stuff, I believe. It's just a save edited file. So what you can do is you load up the save file onto your PS3, and it's on some other systems now. And it comes with all 10 character slots filled out with all characters are at base stats, but they have like a stockpile of every item you could possibly have. And they sometimes enable cheating in some other ways too. Like they could have warpable bonfires from the start, even if you don't have the Lord Vessel, or in the case of Dark Souls 2, well, actually, I don't think the mule for Dark Souls 2 lets you warp, but I have a modified one that lets me do that. So, I mean, you can always warp from bonfires from the start in Dark Souls 2, but not until you get to them. But I have a little workaround with that with my Mega Mule that I use. Mm-hmm. So, it's basically the shorter explanation. I was going on a bit of a tangent, but it's basically just a save edited file that lets you cheat. And it has some controversy because, of course, you can use that to your advantage. But at the same time, for me, someone like me, if trying to learn how something works, I mean, it's a total godsend.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, the idea that there are these tools that are neither good nor evil. It's just how you use them.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. It's, some people, I've been criticized before for sort of having to cheat or whatever to learn about some mechanics, but to me, it's just sort of like, if no one's being harmed, I'm not worried about it. I would love to learn about all the mechanics, using any tools that are available.
Yeah. That seems like a weird thing for people to get upset about.
Yeah, I don't know. Some people just, want something to nitpick about, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not, because you're not like just for playing the game. It's not like you're robbing yourself of the experience. It's experience you've had many, many, many times over. You're trying to go for depth.
Yeah, and I don't even jump into this stuff until I've cleared the game. I remember I made a post on the Tumblr saying like, oh yeah, I'm not going to be posting about Dark Souls 2 for a while just because I needed to play the game first. But right off the bat, there was so much speculation about mechanics that I sort of forced myself along so I could jump into the testing.
We also had to kind of mainline the game pretty quick.
Yeah,
for the show experience we got.
Yeah.
So when you so there's one way that's kind of the testing. The other thing you mentioned is kind of poking around the files and stuff. And how does that work? And again, just assume that the person listening knows nothing about how to go about that or what that.
Well, that's easy because I actually know very little about that. Yeah, I'm really not the most knowledgeable when it comes to programming or even dumping the files. I have very limited knowledge. So sort of what I do is I just sort of talk to people who know more about that kind of stuff, and I'm always eager to get my hands on whatever sort of file dumps I can. And then once I do that, I'll systematically go through and if I have any questions, I'll try to, if I think I'm onto something, I'll sort of refer back to someone who's sort of hooked me up with the files, so to speak, and go from there. So, that's been very useful for finding cut content, especially, but not really so much for learning about mechanics. There hasn't been too much headway in learning about mechanics from looking at the files so much.
Yeah, and that makes sense because you had mentioned kind of having a limited knowledge of programming and stuff, and I imagine that's something that determines invasion locations is not going to look as easy to digest as dialogue files,
right? Yeah, exactly. And I'm under the impression, even for people who are more knowledgeable about that sort of thing, that there's still a huge hurdle. I remember before Dark Souls 2 came out, there were a lot of people who were very optimistic that as soon as the PC version came out, that all of the mechanics and secrets would be figured out because people could just sort of poke into the files. But it's most mechanics require the sort of like old-fashioned testing I was talking about.
Yeah. What do the files look like when you get to them? I mean, I imagine it's just stuff like the dialogue and things. Yeah, that's a lot of audio files. But are you mostly looking through like XML sheets or things like that and trying to read the tea leaves from there?
Mostly everything I get my hands on is already neatly sanitized for me. So like the audio files will already be dumped as WAV or converted to MP3 for me. If I'm looking at the texture files, I've had a lot of those batch converted to like PNG. And a lot of the other stuff in text dumps will just be in various text formats. So I'll go poking around through those as well.
Right.
Yeah. So it's really it's probably an underwhelming answer. I don't really do anything that techie with the files. I just sort of the one thing I do contribute, I think, is being thorough and trying to systematically go through everything and see if we can find anything that's been unused. I mean, you'd be surprised. There was like in Dark Souls 1. There was a text dump out for like a long time before I really went through it thoroughly. And when I went through it, I had already found like a bunch of things that I'd never seen anyone else mention. So
it's not underwhelming. I think it's what maybe you're reacting to, or at least what I'm feeling is that some of the stuff that you've done, it's really kind of mind-boggling to think of you doing it like beating the pavement and doing it, like specifically the Vagrant thing. Like it's like the results of which are so thorough and so detailed that it seems like something that there would be kind of information on. So it's kind of, shattering one of my illusions more than anything. Like it's not a bad answer. It's not bad that you're not good at that stuff. It's amazing that you've found what you did without using it.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. If anyone's interested, I could maybe talk about that a little bit, but I have a post on my Tumblr that it sort of explains the history of how I figured out vagrants, because I mean the mechanics are so obtuse and so complicated that that's sort of one of the reasons I want to start the Tumblr is I'm adding stuff to these wiki pages, and anyone can make these edits and stuff. So I sort of wanted to put a face to who's adding this stuff and is it legit type of thing. So the vagrant mechanics are just so off the wall and so arbitrary and specific that I would be skeptical if I read them on a random site. So I sort of had to I felt compelled to lay out the history for that just because it's so ridiculous.
Yeah. Do you want to kind of summarize that just briefly?
Yeah, sure. For the longest time, people had some very basic information on how the vagrants worked. If you haven't played Dark Souls 1, there were these rare creatures that could spawn kind of randomly, only online, and sometimes they'd attack you. There'd be another kind that wouldn't, and they'd just drop just a sort of random item, and it was shrouded in mystery for a long time. But the game manual sort of specified that there were sort of two different ways they could spawn. One was like if players lost a lot of humanity, or if they dropped a certain item or items. It was kind of vague. So we sort of had that basic starting information for a long time, but I couldn't really think of a way to test it. And there would be some people online sort of saying like, hey, let's get together for a PvP event, and everyone just sort of drop items and see if anything happens. But nothing really came out of those. So it was something that I just sort of put on the side for a while. Like, yeah, I don't know if we'll ever figure this out until the Mega Mule came out. And that made it easy to stockpile humanity really fast and have stockpiles of items. So I started playing around with that and finally made some headway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really neat. Like, it is one of those things that it's interesting to see kind of both sides of it, because I feel like the vagueness of that mechanic is intentional in that a normal playthrough of the game, you're supposed to feel kind of lucky if you run into one of them.
Oh yeah,
one or two. Like, I mean, like I've never run into two of them on a playthrough. Like, you know,
I don't think I have either. Well, I mean, aside from the ones that I've spawned.
Wait a minute.
Blowing this case wide open.
Yeah, I've probably seen 100 of them by now at least. So, yeah. And to go further down the rabbit hole, I don't know if the viewers would find this interesting, just about how weird the learning process was. For a while, people noticed that sometimes randomly in your world, you'd find a random item bag on the floor somewhere, and it could happen to you only online, but it could still happen if you never got invaded or anything. So you just show up to Anne Orlando before you've even been there, and you roll up to the bonfire, and there's like a bag on the ground carrying a Lloyd's talisman or something. You're kind of like, what the hell is that? And that turned out to be the way one of the types of vagrant spawns is. If you drop certain items, they'll get transported around different worlds as those item bags, and if they don't get picked up, eventually they'll turn into a vagrant. And that was something that was super weird to learn about, because this one person had figured out that after they dropped a bunch of random stuff and left and returned to the area, sometimes they started finding these item bags, and it just took us a while to figure out that he was sometimes randomly dropping the items that worked and getting lucky where he'd send them to another player's world online, and if that player didn't find the item bag, they might likewise abandon it and send it to his world. And it just sort of took a lot of chipping away to figure out that that's what was happening.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like about that Vagrant post is the kind of call to arms where it's like, if you see one of these bags, don't pick it up. It's just going to be a Lloyd's talisman. You don't want it, and we want more Vagrants, right? Yeah. And I think that we can all agree on that. So
yeah, and I tried crowdsourcing a bunch of times, and it actually worked very well for me. But I put out a few call to arms because I post on the Dark Souls Reddit a bunch. And it was funny. There were people there who were sort of jaded for a while, complaining if they saw another picture of a vagrant. People on Reddit complain if they complain about anything. But yeah, they were complaining a lot, saying oh, not another vagrant post. And I'd be the only person being please tell me where you saw it. Please tell me what it dropped. And and actually, I mean, that's how I sort of got the ground off. Before I even was testing how they worked, I was just gathering whatever information I could, and I'd be pulling that from Reddit posts and YouTube videos and stuff like that. Because it was sort of even just basic information was hard to get, and I was able to learn about stuff just by looking at what was out there. There'd be a lot of guesswork about what they drop and stuff like that, and to get started about learning about them, it's all I have to do is look up screenshots and ask people what they dropped, and that's how I sort of started building up information on them.
Kind of approaching it anecdotally, right?
Yeah, but trying to be as careful as I could with the anecdotes. If someone said hey, I killed one a month ago and I think it dropped this, I'd probably not use that information. But if someone had just posted a screenshot, then I'd say, yeah, they probably remember correctly. Yeah. Yeah, it's always risky sort of trusting the anecdotes, because that's where a lot of wrong information comes from.
Yeah, it's funny and also kind of fascinating that a lot of this, especially the post about your process for for finding the vagrants, it's so scientifically, it's kind of couched in the scientific method, talking about forming a hypothesis, talking about good data and bad data, and it's interesting that this kind of started out with a weird social bent to it, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny treating these little things as science projects. I mean, they're not that formal by any means. I'm certainly not writing any papers about the process, but it's funny. Yeah, I try to treat it as little science projects, sort of turning a video game into something. I guess I'm able to do it because I'm obsessed with these games in the first place. I probably wouldn't have the patience for it if I didn't love these games.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that the people who take their interest in Souls games and take it further. Like it kind of expresses itself in different ways. Mm-hmm. So, we do our show, and then people do really long lore videos, and then people do like gimmick PvP builds and everything. Just kind of grabs you in different ways. How did you, so you say, you're a big fan of the series, obviously, because you'd have to be. How'd you get into it? Like, how did you get just into general Souls fandom?
I had never played any other FromSoft games before, unfortunately. I should go back and still play some of them. So I came in as a complete newbie, and I had heard very good things about Demon Souls, but I didn't have a PS3 at the time, so I was sort of not letting myself get too sucked in. I saw some screenshots, some positive reviews, and I was like, oh, that looks cool, type of thing. And but then eventually a friend had picked it up and said, hey, I picked up this really weird role-playing game that's kind of stupidly hard. And he's like, I'm not too into it, but he told me, he thought it would be up my alley. And I went over and played it, and I fell in love with the game instantly. I know some people express like there's a sort of a period they have to go through before they appreciate the games, but I love Demon Souls right away. Like the first time I fell in that pit in Boletaria, like there's like the pit above Meralda's, or no, what's her name? Yeah, Meralda. Like when I fell in there, it just sort of dawned on me. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to go back and learn how to get around that pit without getting killed by those guys, and like I loved the process of the games right away.
Yeah, old FromSoft games are good too. I would recommend. We did Kingsfield for the show, Kingsfield 4, and I recommend that game to just about anybody who likes Soul stuff. Like it takes a little while to get used to it, but I think it's really fun.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'd be down for those. I mean, I've grown up on playing a lot of games when they were already outdated. Like I didn't have too many consoles growing up, so I've sort of come into a lot of older games, like from the sort of retro perspective, and those games look up my alley. Do you know if are the Kingsfield games still available on like PlayStation download, or was that only like a temporary thing?
They are not, but they're not too expensive to just get.
Yeah.
So the Ancient City, like all of them are like less than $20.
Awesome.
Yeah. The main reason why I'm trying to get you to play Kingsfield is because I want someone to finally solve the mystery of the Lich King's brooch, which is that's not a thing. I'm just kidding.
I would have no idea.
There's less esoterica in those games, I believe. But
is that something that's somewhat exclusive to the Souls series? Is that like a Miyazaki contribution? Because I have no idea if people like probe the depths of Armored Core like in a similar way.
I don't imagine so. What's interesting too when you talk about again, I keep going back to the Vagrants because that's probably the most complicated single thing. But when you think about just the amount of time that had to go into making that work, like it's complicated on the border of needlessly complicated. Yeah. Like people spent time working on those things and programming that, and that just very specific, like if you drop certain items and they're picked, they transfer between a certain number of worlds and this happens and this happens. Like it is very complicated in service of something that is so, and that's the thing that we always talk about in the Souls games, like huge, they hide entire areas that you're not going to get, like lots of work going into something that only a few people are going to get.
That's something that I always really appreciate about the games too. Like I'm a big fan of Symphony of the Night, and that was a game where I played through it, got like the crappy ending or whatever, and went back to replay it, and I was already finding all the stuff I didn't find the previous time, and then the more and more I started reading about the game online, I was like, holy crap, they packed like tons and tons of stuff into this game. And the Souls games I feel like are the next evolution of that. Like, I don't want to call them I don't want to compare them too heavily to Castlevania because I feel like they do things a lot better than Castlevania. But I grew up as a Castlevania fan, and I felt like the Souls games sort of took the best aspects of that, especially all of the weird, secretive, bizarre aspects, and totally just ran away with it. And I love that about the Souls games. Yeah.
There's something about the bravery or audacity of putting a lot of effort into something that you're pretty sure people won't see.
Yeah. And it's very rewarding when you do find that stuff. Whether you find it yourself or even if you have to read about it, I don't think it takes away from it too much, even if you have to look it up, because it's just something for you. It gives you like a lot of replay value. Yeah, being able to find more as you go.
It builds that sense of mystery.
Yeah. And that's something I give Dark Souls a lot of credit for. Like I think you could maybe debate on how effective. Maybe how good of an idea it was to have a lot of obtuse mechanics, but I feel like Dark Souls is the most mysterious game I've ever played. There's not many games I can think of. Maybe back in the day there would be like playground rumors about video games, and that's sort of been lost in the age of the internet, I feel like. And they sort of figured out like how to make that work again, which is awesome.
How to turn the internet into the playground again.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly what they did, and I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, and by contrast, like Dark Souls 2 seems to, it's much more mechanically friendly, and I think that in that exchange we kind of lost a little bit of that mystery. Can you talk to me about, how you approach Dark Souls 2 and, if you found any kind of like dangling threads that you're tempted to pull on?
I feel like there's no secrets as big as like the vagrants, something that like people knew was there, but just absolutely like had no idea what was going on for a long time. But I still think Dark Souls 2 it is almost just as vague as Dark Souls 1 in a lot of ways, though. Because I remember before the game came out, they were sort of promising that it would be more clear or whatever. I forgot what the word that was used that caused controversy, but
an easy game for babies.
Yeah, right. Yeah. They promised an easy game for babies, but what we actually got was something that was just as bizarre and obtuse in a lot of ways. So, I mean, there's stuff like Soul Memory, which is probably my other biggest project that I worked on, apart from Vagrants, and other stuff like that they really didn't explain. So there's still a lot of stuff to figure out in Dark Souls 2. There's still stuff we don't know about Dark Souls 2. So,
yeah, I remember adaptability was a big one. Around the launch, figuring that out and the relation to invincibility frames and stuff.
Oh yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up actually, because that's something that's sort of outside my area of what I can contribute to, because the best information for that comes from like recording video and like slowing down the frames and doing like this tedious comparison, and anything where you have to learn like active frames or stuff like that from video editing, that's always been outside of my capabilities. So I always defer to others on that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Although I did recently see there was someone had posted this video recently. Maybe I'll send you a link for if you guys can put it in the show notes. Someone with Cheat Engine, and I'm really surprised I haven't seen more of this. Like, a lot of people want to know how active parry frames work, meaning when you press the parry button, how long does it take before parry frames actually trigger, and how long do they last for every like weapon type? And someone created a Cheat Engine script where it displays like a 0 on the screen while those frames are not active, and then it switches to a 1 while they are active. So a lot of people before were doing like crazy tedious stuff where you'd have to like try to parry an enemy, hope you get them to like parry you at the earliest frame possible. Like, you'd have to do like tons and tons of takes to try to get like every end of the spectrum. And but now there's like some tool out there which I haven't seen used too much where it just shows it. So I'd imagine other people could just like record that and count the frames and be done with it. So that's something I'd love to see people do.
That's interesting. I remember with Dark Souls 1, there's a YouTube guy named Vegeta311, which I always, kind of make fun of his name because it's just like, Dragon Ball and the worst band ever together at last. But he did a parry video, and in Dark Souls 1, there was a spark. So like if you parried up against the wall, there was a spark at the beginning of your active window and a spark at the end. So he did like a video kind of explaining that.
That's crazy.
And awesome. And we lost that visual indication in Dark Souls 2.
Right.
So it's just such a little thing that can, make such a big difference.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's other stuff too we still don't know. I mean, people have been wanting to know how the luck, or I don't know what to call it, like item discovery stat works in Dark Souls 2. And again, that's more of the tinkering around to the memory, which I don't have the gaming PC, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm hoping others can look into that, because that's like, people have no idea how much the luck boosting items stack, if there's a limit to it, and people still haven't figured that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's because you can't test that the same way you can with the soul boosting items. It's easy to kill a guy and then throw on some gloves and see what happens if you kill the same guy.
Oh yeah, anything involving RNG, like you would need a gargantuan like sample set to have any idea how it's really working, and that's just kind of unreasonable. Like, who wants to kill like 4,000 enemies and and figure out drop rates? Like, that's even I would draw the line for something like that.
So like all the language of kind of statistics that you use and use in this, so like drop rates and sample set and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Do you have is there any part of your real life where you did this, or is this just like you just have kind of learned this fairly sound like scientific statistical analysis, like just through this?
Oh,
like, is this what you do for a day job or anything like that?
No. Just through this, pretty much. Yeah,
cool.
I haven't really applied this to anything else.
Yeah. Well, God help us all if you do.
Yeah. Something just from paying attention to the blog over time, it seems like you've gotten more confident in kind of drawing conclusions and, synthesizing lore conjecture out of, especially the unused assets that you find. Is that something where, you just have kind of done it for so long and, and know how much there is to connect, or, is that due to kind of extra information that you're getting?
Somewhere in the middle, probably. It could also be due to me running out of like mechanics to talk about, at least at the moment. So it's like I'm filling in the gap, like because sometimes I'll go weeks without adding anything to the Tumblr. So if I feel like I have some speculation, I try to keep speculation to a minimum on the blog. But if I find some sort of something concrete involving unused content, and I feel like my speculation is not too wild, then I'll be happy to write about it. The weirdest thing that I think I found in Dark Souls 2 that I don't really see talked about, I guess because maybe it's not that interesting, but in the Shaded Woods, there's a couple like areas off in the distance where it's like there's these sort of unused paths and doorways, and if you no-clip out there, there's really nothing out there, but it's pretty clear that they designed the areas with like some vestigial, like, there's some leftover vestigial, like maybe entrances to the area, and it's really weird. I mean, there's really nothing like that in Dark Souls 1. Like, they have boarded up doorways and stuff like that, but you get the sense that that's sort of how they design the level. But this is stuff you're not supposed to see. It's like you'd have to fly off into the distance, and then you find this weird little random spot, and it's kind of like, what were they thinking for this? So it's fun to speculate about stuff like that.
We've talked about that a lot on the show, too. Like, areas maybe not being in the same place they ended up. They're kind of maybe being an intention to have you visit the areas in a different order.
Yeah,
based on a couple different things.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that in the previous episode. There's a lot of speculation about the Iron Keep and relating to the Forest of Fallen Giants. And I don't know what to make of that. That's really interesting theory. And but as far as like content goes, I can't find anything to strongly link them. But it's just so tantalizing. Like the weird key that you get that says it's to like the Iron Keep or whatever, and it's beneath the salamander area, and just kind of like, very weird stuff.
It's just he just in case he just wants to hang out down there.
Yeah,
right.
Like that's his summer home is just in this like salamander dung pit. And if you ever just see it, like sometimes I just like to hang around a hawk ring. I don't even need to wear it. I just want to be in the same room as it.
Yeah. No, maybe he was house sitting, and that's why he had the key. Yeah, just go down there and feed my salamanders if you could. Water my plant. The plants are burned. Okay, don't worry about that.
Don't water the plants. Yeah. Whatever you do. So is there anything specifically that you're working on now, like any kind of long-term looking and stuff, like anything on the horizon that you know of?
Not too much. I always just find new random projects to pick up. Just recently, not too long ago, I made that spreadsheet of the unused dialogue samples.
Thank you so much for doing that.
Oh yeah, I really wish I'd thought of that sooner too, because I realized like you've already done the bulk of your areas, so there's like probably not too much more NPC dialogue to reference. But I don't know. Like I was just sort of I do a lot of stuff that I don't write about on the Tumblr as well. Nothing major, but I'll just go and like sort of look up something on the wiki if it seems like it's wrong or incomplete, and try to find out what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was gonna say when one of these DLCs comes out, is there kind of like a mad scramble for that stuff? Like, would you go through it kind of day and date and look for things that might be unusual? Because I felt like a little bit like there's some kind of mechanical things and at least potential for hidden stuff introduced in both of the ones that have been released so far.
Oh yeah, I mean it depends on what I see in the upcoming patch notes. When stuff like new weapons are added, I sort of figure there's like already a lot of people interested in that. So I'm not really rushing to find out like exact upgrade values or like weapon move sets. I sort of figure, the community is going to figure that out to begin with. But when the first DLC launched, they mentioned that they were tweaking the soul memory ranges. So as soon as that patch launched, that was like a mad dash because I knew everyone's going to be asking for it. There were already like topics going up hourly being like, how does soul memory work now? And I was like, doing that as fast as I possibly could with testing partners, figuring out how that worked.
Cool. Yeah. So we got some questions that people have written in and kind of prompts. Some of the stuff you've already answered.
Okay.
So we'll probably acknowledge that the person asked, but we just kind of already covered it. We want to make you answer the same thing again. But one that is a relevant thing that is not something that we've already answered. Murphy wrote in to say, so is there something that you're looking to find and know that you won't find?
Looking to find but know that I won't find.
Something you want to find but know that you won't.
Oh, definitely like unused areas. That's something I was even just playing around with recently. My friend who goes by the handle of Demon's Lantern, he's the guy who helped rip textures from Demon Souls. He's like the more techie guy who helps supply me with a lot of these files. He and I were reviewing like unused bonfire locations, and we sort of figured out that there's these unused bonfires that have like a certain number before their name, and if you were to use Cheat Engine on PC, you could sort of like adapt that number to be like a place that you could warp to when you use like the dark sign or whatever. So like we went through like every like unused bonfire slot and like extra spaces where we think they could be hiding locations, and like we knew in advance it wasn't going to work. We're like, somebody would have found this already, but we still sort of try to poke around for that kind of stuff just in case. But yeah, there's always like unused content that we know is not really going to lead to anything special. Maybe we'll say like, hey, check out this hallway, put the use no clip to see if there's anything back there. And sometimes we find little weird details, but we know we're not going to find anything big.
Yeah, I imagine like the dream scenario is like you warp somewhere and you're in a hallway and you walk, and then like the title card pops up and it's like Frost King's Airy or something like that. And you're just like, whoa, shit. Here it comes.
I should probably point out there's like most of the unused bonfires clearly belong to different areas the way they're numbered. There's one like Sanctum of the Scorned or something, and you can look at that and be like, oh, this bonfire was supposed to be in the Black Gulch or whatever. And I didn't post that on the Tumblr yet. I'll post that soon, actually. We made like a list of these locations. And but there's one bonfire called Alva's Resting Place, and it's not listed like – it doesn't sync up with any of the other areas in a way we can figure out. So it's sort of one unused location that we're just kind of like, we have no context, no clue whatsoever where it could be. And I know Helka, I was talking to Hellkite Drake recently about it, and he said he was looking around for it and like sort of got stuck in the same place. It's just kind of like, who knows what the heck this is supposed to be.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because that would have lore implications for Alva. Yeah. So sometimes the bonfire names are explicit in that way.
Yeah, and I know there's some unused dialogue for sorry to go off on a tangent, but there's some unused dialogue from Strayed. It's not in like the samples, but it's like in the captions for the game. He has a line saying something about he used to have a king named Alvis, and I know that in the early versions of the game there were some like transitional issues, like in the network test you could find some captions for Majula like spelled incorrectly. So I sort of wonder, like, there's one random reference to this king named Alvis, and you don't see any other mention of that anywhere in game. And they're saying something about like Alva's resting place. I wonder if like Alva and Alvis is the same person, maybe, but I don't have too much to base that on.
Yeah.
For anybody listening who can't quite put their finger on who Alva was, he's referenced in his armor set. He is a guy who was looking for a cure for something called Saint Soretta's sickness. But he failed and relinquished his knighthood, and that kind of pursuit kind of puts him like being associated maybe with the gutter or the gulch or something like that, right?
Right. And the other thing that could maybe tie it to the gulch, something I was thinking about, is there's the bonfire called Harvel's Resting Place. So if there's an Alva's Resting Place, those two names are very similar. I could maybe imagine that maybe somewhere else in the pit they would have wanted to stick something like that. But again, that's the type, to go back to the question, it's like we were hoping to find something like that in the area, but we just kind of knew we wouldn't.
Yeah. Continuing on here, let's see. Jeremy Greer asked, and I think you kind of answered this question, but I want to make sure we address it. He's always been curious about why you do all this on the PS3 when it seems like the PC version would be easier to hack apart.
Oh God, yeah, it would be much easier. Yeah, I just don't have a gaming PC yet, so that's something I would like to get at some point in the future. But it's sort of like still deciding. I'm definitely going to get a PS4 for Bloodborne. I don't have one yet, so I'm sure that's going to further delay being able to do anything like that on PC. But if I had it, I would definitely ditch using Mega Mule for testing. So.
And so you mentioned you got into this with Dark Souls 1. and you'd never done. I'm just Wicked Rob, which is not his Christian name. He asked whether the first game you got into this, but I think we kind of covered that because I wasn't sure if this is just something you got into with Souls or if this is something you'd done with other games and then you're just hit the gold mine with Souls. But you said Dark Souls 1 was the first game you kind of got into this.
Yeah. I think maybe the only comparable thing I did. I'm also really into like retro video game music. So before I was doing like cut content with the Souls games, I was like sort of poking around like how chiptunes worked, and I did a lot of exploring of music files of video games. So that's like a whole other weird rabbit hole to go down. But I'm also a big nerd of like music and old video games.
Nice. Yeah, you and me both, buddy. Start a blog on that because I'm not. I don't know any of the technical stuff. I just I
actually have one. I haven't updated it in like forever. I need to go back to it, but it's retrogameaudio.tumblr.com. Okay. I like made some YouTube videos a while back, just sort of talking about like how different sounds are constructed, and it was mostly about the NES. And I was hoping to branch off more, but just sort of that sort of died off. But I'll be firing it back up eventually.
Yeah, be still my heart. I will watch those YouTubes. That is interesting to me because I love old video game music and on the record many times saying it. I don't know anything about I just don't have the kind of discipline to dive into the technical side of it. But I love the results.
Oh so. Yeah, I'll definitely have to send you some videos because that's something I sort of try to put into layman's terms because I'm also not the most technically minded. If I was to read like a manual, like a tech document saying how it worked, it'd probably go over my head. But sort of after playing around with it a lot and having a little bit of musical background, I've sort of able to relate all the technical stuff to musical stuff. So
I'm doing God's work, man.
So, a follow-up question to that just comes from my noggin. Could you see yourself doing this kind of approach to another game series or something else that is not soul related?
Now that I think about it, I don't really know because I don't know of other games where the mechanics are as debated as much, and that could be partially due to me not being as active with other games. Because I play the Souls games like way more than anything else. I think the last game I spent some time on was like Portal 2 or something. But like a game like that, I would have no idea like where to even begin. I'm sure I feel like if I get the impression that other people have already dissecting things and learning things, like I'm not sure if there's much I can contribute. Mm-hmm. It's just with the Souls games, I saw like this gate, like this giant chasm of like knowledge, like where people have no idea what's going on, and sort of like, oh yeah, I can figure that out and have some fun doing it.
What's interesting, like what a lot of that stuff I feel like in other games comes from tool-assisted speedruns, like a lot of the frame count esoterica. Like you're actually invincible on this frame, or like if you end up with this item in this area, you're not supposed to have it, so the game doesn't have hit detection and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Like speedrunners try to crack that stuff open. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot in common that I didn't really think about before you started talking about your process between the two methods.
Oh yeah, I can definitely see some parallels. It involves a lot of careful, thorough like analyzation of how everything works.
Mm-hmm. No. So I've got kind of a longer question here from Luke. And he says, and this is paraphrasing, so immersion is very important, a very important part of a lot of games, and the Souls series are included in that. Has your work had any impact on your ability to enjoy the game world and its characters, or are you always kind of poking at the seams as you play?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's funny because I remember I made a post a while back where some people complained a little bit, not like they weren't sincerely mad, but they were sort of joking that I helped like ruin the illusion for them. Yeah, I try to. I think I do a good job separating the two things. I still do normal playthroughs where I'm able to turn the analytical side of my head off and just get sucked into the atmosphere. But I do a lot of poking at the seams, I guess. And in some ways, like the way I guess one good example would be like the distant scenery in Dark Souls 1. Like I've had people help me fly out with like Cheat Engine and take a lot of screenshots and like sort of poke around how the distant scenery is rendered, and like that's one part of the illusion I can never get back because it's like now I know like how things actually are if you go out there, and it just kind of feels weird. So like the mystery of like what's behind this blocked off area or what's in that distant view, it's just kind of like I'd say that's gone for me for Dark Souls 1. Yeah. It's kind of like the view of Ash Lake from Tomb of the Giants would be an example. It's like it's this gorgeous view, but when I look at it, I'm kind of like, oh, that doesn't make too much sense.
Yeah.
Huh. So Trent asked via the contact form, are any of the Souls games harder to crack open than the others, and if so, why?
I get the impression, I would say all of the games are equally obtuse. I think Demon Souls had its world tendency, and again, by the time I got into the game, the wiki was pretty well established, and I don't know if that was something that From helped clarify how it worked at some point, but I know that if they hadn't, that would be something that would be like totally insane to figure out. So I guess right from the get-go, each game has had its like major system that was tricky to figure out. Dark Souls had vagrants, and even level ranges were debated a lot, but that wasn't as bad as Soul Memory. And then Soul Memory, again, for Dark Souls 2, that was the huge project for that. I mean, figuring out how that works was crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I think they're all equal, pretty much.
Yeah, I too love all my children. I mean, there's a couple. We just had a couple other questions, but I feel like we've already covered, kind of covered the material there. But thanks everybody who's listening who submitted questions for Illusory, and just kind of by way of wrapping up, can you just remind everybody online where they can find you online?
Oh, sure. My Tumblr is illusorywall.tumblr.com. And I also make just random posts on forums sometimes, often on Reddit, sometimes on GameFAQs. I sort of dig around any community to see if I can learn more, help spread some information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I make random edits to the wikis as well. So if you troll like recent changes to Wikidot, you might find me sort of tampering over there.
I like that makes it sound like you're like a shoe repairing gnome or something. like going.
Illusory was here.
Yeah. But we really appreciate you coming on the show, and we appreciate everything you do. It makes our jobs easier.
Okay,
and
thank you.
Even as so as what we do, like the limited degree that we kind of go in depth, and then also just as a fan, it also I've really appreciated it ever since I became aware, which is quite a while now.
Yeah.
I've been reading your stuff for a long time, so I really appreciate it. I was really happy to be able to have you on the show.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. And I'm a big fan of your podcast. It gave me a lot of company sometimes while I'm doing my stupid playthroughs, I was like binging a lot on your podcast. So I thank you guys a ton for the awesome work you guys put out.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh. So if you're listening to this episode, it's a little bit of an oddity episode. There's not going to be an appendix next week. Next week, we are going to be talking about the Undead Crypt and the Shrine of Amana with David Plavis, who is a researcher for Riot Games and noted Soulsman and a buddy of mine. And if you have any questions or comments about that, you can get in touch with us through Duckfeed.tv /contact.
Mm-hmm. And you can also hit up our Facebook page, facebook.com/bonfiresidechat. For any discussion around those things too.
Yeah, and know that we do have a couple of these other kind of special episodes in the pipeline. We're going to do episode on PvP, obviously. We also we don't have it quite on the schedule yet, but Lobos is going to come back and talk about speedrunning Dark Souls 2, which I'm excited about because he's like the nicest guy in the world.
Yep,
and he's a real pleasure to talk to. So. All this stuff. So we're kind of slowing it down, kindling that bonfire until like February 4th. Right? Like
5th, yeah.
February 5th.
Oh,
so now
wait.
now that we have a release date in mind, we know exactly how much time we have to fill. Yeah. That's not true. These are all things we wanted to do anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep.
We got the spreadsheets to back that up.
This will be the longest season of the show so far.
Yeah.
I think maybe about just about like twice as long actually as the Dark Souls run.
Well, that makes sense though, because I think that one, we didn't know the areas quite as well, and two, we're in Dark Souls 1 in that season, there are a couple episodes we did that were just covered insane amounts of space.
Yeah.
Like we did all of the DLC in one like 2.5 hour episode. Mm-hmm. It was ridiculous. And these, this game has 3 DLCs, each of which are really meaty and long.
Yeah.
It's a bigger game.
True that.
Mm-hmm. Do we have anything else by way of admin?
No. All the stuff. Our Patreon.
Yeah. Sorry that you're getting this a little bit later than you usually do, but I'm editing it literally after we hang up.
Yeah, sorry guys.
No.
Oh, no, not at all.
Vacation.
Man. Yeah, no, that's you've earned it. The people can wait a couple hours.
Yeah.
So the but yeah, and Patreon people who didn't get the early access, it's I thank you in advance for your understanding.
Yes.
So cool. Yeah. So what should they do until next time?
Seek misery, so the world might be sundered.
Yep. So you can understand the misery mechanics.
Yes.
And we all pray that we will have far more soon